Don't Buy Christmas. Introduction. This is not a book about being cheap. This is not a book about skipping Christmas or not caring about your family. This is not a book that says you shouldn't buy gifts or celebrate or give generously. This is a book about happy Christmas. We believe in Christmas. We believe in lights and laughter and gifts under the tree. We believe in your kids waking up excited, in your family gathered together, in abundance and joy and celebration. We believe in all of it. What we don't believe in is guilty Christmas. The kind where you're stressed about money while you're wrapping presents. The kind where January comes and you're paying interest charges on December's joy. The kind where you smile while opening gifts with your family but feel sick inside because you're drowning in debt. That Christmas is a trap. And this book is about breaking free from it. Here's what we know. The average American will spend $1,107 on Christmas this year. 71% of that, around $736, will go straight to gifts. By March, after 3 months of credit card interest at 21% APR, that $1,107 will have turned into $1,181. You'll have paid an extra $74 in pure interest on gifts that people have already forgotten about. You'll be stressed about money. You'll feel guilty. You'll promise yourself that next year will be different. And then next year comes, and you do it all over again. But it doesn't have to be this way. This book isn't against Christmas gifts. This book is against Christmas debt. This book isn't against celebration. This book is against the guilt that turns celebration into financial desperation. This book isn't against spending money. This book is against spending money you don't have, and then paying interest on it for months. What we're offering is something radical. A Christmas where you give gifts and feel joy instead of guilt. Where you celebrate without debt. Where January comes and you're not stressed. Where your kids remember the love, not the credit card bills that haunted their parent all winter. That's possible. That's what this book is about. Inside, you'll meet 4 people: Sarah, Mark, Layla, and James. They all felt the guilt. They all spent more than they could afford. They all looked at their January credit card bills and felt their stomachs drop. And they all made a choice. Never again. What you'll discover is that breaking free from Christmas debt isn't about deprivation. It's about intention. It's about planning. It's about understanding that you can give generously and celebrate fully without destroying your financial life. This book is going to show you exactly how. By the time you finish reading, you'll understand why the guilt happens, how the financial trap works, and, most importantly, how to break free from it. You'll have concrete strategies. You'll have stories from real people who did this and came out the other side. You'll have permission to celebrate Christmas differently than you've been told you should. And you'll discover that a happy Christmas, where you're fully present, fully generous, and completely free of guilt, is within reach. This year, you get to choose. You get to decide if this is the year you keep playing the same game that breaks you, or the year you stop and try something different. Welcome to Breaking Free. Chapter 1. The $1,107 Trap: How the System Got Built. You're about to spend $1,107 on Christmas this year. The average American does. 71% of that goes straight to gifts. Around $736 on things people will forget by February. Add in decorations, special ingredients for holiday meals, groceries for hosting, flights you're thinking about booking, and that $1,107 becomes $1,400, sometimes $1,600 or more. But here's what matters. That money doesn't actually leave you in December. It follows you for months. By March, when you've been making minimum payments on your credit card and the interest has been accumulating, that $1,107 has turned into $1,181. That's what the system really costs you. Not $1,107, $1,181. Here's what happened to Sarah last Christmas. She's 43, works in marketing, makes decent money. But December always terrifies her because the cycle never breaks. She walked into stores in October of last year and felt the pressure immediately. Limited time offers. While supplies last, this deal ends tonight. By the time she got home, she'd already spent $300 on things she didn't plan to buy. She told herself she'd stop. She didn't. By mid-December, her credit card bill showed $1,600 spent on Christmas when she'd budgeted $800. She still had 2 weeks of shopping left to go. The $1,600 she spent in December became $1,900 by March of this year. 3 months of minimum payments, and the interest kept adding up, turning her decision into something much worse. And now, sitting here in November again, she's watching it happen all over again. The cycle is starting exactly the same way. This is how the system works. It didn't happen by accident. Somewhere in the 1950s, when Christmas shifted from being a religious holiday to a consumer one, retailers figured out something crucial. People feel guilty around Christmas. They realize that guilt is profitable. If they could make you feel like you weren't doing enough, weren't loving enough, weren't generous enough, then they could make you spend money you don't have. And it worked. It still works. Every year, 36% of Americans prove it works by going into debt they didn't have to go into. And that debt, like Sarah's, compounds into something much bigger. Think about how many times this month alone you felt that guilt. Someone mentioned their Christmas budget and it was bigger than yours. And suddenly you felt small. Your kid mentioned something a friend is getting, and you thought about whether you could afford to match it. You scrolled through Instagram and saw elaborate gift hauls, and you wondered if your Christmas would look smaller by comparison. That guilt is not random. That guilt is the product. Retailers didn't invent guilt, but they absolutely weaponized the belief that spending money equals caring about people, that a price tag is how you prove your love. The psychology of it is almost elegant in how it operates. When you feel guilty, your brain looks for a way to make the guilt stop. Spending money creates a temporary hit of relief. You buy something, and for just a moment, the guilt quiets down. Because you did something, you took action, you showed you care. It's not solving anything. You're not addressing the real reason you feel guilty, which is usually that you're stretched too thin, you have too many expectations on you, and nobody gave you permission to say no. But the purchase feels like doing something, and your brain accepts that as solving the problem. Until the guilt comes back a few days later and you spend more money to make it stop again. This is the guilt to spending cycle, and it's been weaponized against you since October. What makes it worse is that you're not just fighting your own guilt, you're fighting a system that spent decades teaching you to believe certain things about Christmas. You're fighting your childhood memories of how your parents showed you they cared. You're fighting your cultural programming about what good parenting looks like. You're fighting the expectation that Christmas is supposed to be magical, and magic somehow requires money. Lots of money. In the 1980s, something shifted in advertising. Companies figured out that they couldn't just sell you a toy. They had to sell you the feeling of being a good parent by giving your child that toy. They had to sell you the idea that if you didn't give your child a Nintendo or a Cabbage Patch doll or whatever the hot item was that year, you were failing them. That messaging didn't disappear. It just got more sophisticated. Now it's not just about having the right gifts. It's about the experience. The family photos, the Pinterest perfect setup, the memories, all of which somehow require spending thousands of dollars. What's interesting about $1,107 is that it's been normalized in a way that's almost invisible. If someone told you that you were going to spend $1,107 on anything else this month, you'd be shocked. You'd ask yourself if it was necessary. But when it comes to Christmas, $1,107 sounds reasonable. It sounds normal. Because the system has spent 3 generations training you to accept it. Here's what they don't advertise: that $1,107 doesn't stay $1,107. It compounds. When you can't pay it off in December because you have regular bills, your credit card charges interest. APR on credit card purchases averages about 21%. That means the $1,107 you spent in December becomes $1,181 by March when you've been making minimum payments. That's an extra $74 you didn't spend. That's pure profit for the system, and you're paying it while you're still stressed about your heating bills and car payments and rent. But here's what's really happening. You're not just paying for the gifts. You're paying for the system to teach you that your love has a price tag. You're paying to reinforce the belief that you have no choice. You're paying to keep the cycle alive for next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Every dollar of interest you pay is a vote for the system to keep working exactly the way it does. This year can be different, but you have to understand the trap first. Chapter 2. Who taught you to buy love? You weren't born believing that love has a price tag. Nobody comes into the world thinking that generosity is measured in dollars. That belief was installed in you, layer by layer, year by year, by your family, by advertising, by culture, by the system that profits when you confuse spending money with caring about people. Understanding where that belief comes from is the only way to stop believing it. Psychologists call this phenomenon guilt-driven spending, and it's not accidental. Research from the Journal of Consumer Psychology shows that guilt activates the nucleus accumbens in the brain, the same part that lights up when we experience reward. This means guilt and relief are neurologically connected. When you feel guilty, your brain literally craves the dopamine hit that comes with spending money. It's not a character flaw. It's neurobiology. It's the system working exactly as designed. But where does the guilt actually come from? That's where the real story begins. Think about your childhood. Not the big dramatic moments, but the regular ones. The way your parents showed they cared. Maybe it was a gift on your birthday. Maybe it was the presents under the tree at Christmas. Maybe it was your mother cooking your favorite meal, your father taking you somewhere special, the feeling of abundance during the holidays. These weren't just moments. They were how you learned to recognize love. And somewhere in that learning, you connected love to effort, effort to money, and money to showing that you care. Then came adolescence. You started paying attention to how other families lived. You noticed which kids had the best gifts. You saw the correlation between spending and social standing. Brands began speaking directly to you through television, magazines, and eventually social media. Each message was the same. If you have good taste, if you're a good parent, if you're generous and thoughtful, you buy the right things. Good people spend money. Selfish people don't. By the time you became an adult, the programming was complete. You internalized the belief so deeply that it feels like your own truth. It feels like love actually does cost money. It feels like generosity must have a price tag. It feels like if you don't spend enough at Christmas, you're not doing enough as a parent, a partner, a friend, a family member. That feeling is so real, so familiar, that you've never questioned it. And that's exactly what the system counted on. Mark experienced this firsthand. He's 42, works in construction, and he's been working 2 jobs for years to make ends meet. 2 jobs. And somehow, every Christmas, he still felt like he wasn't doing enough for his kids. His son is 14, his daughter is 9. He'd see their faces on Christmas morning, and he'd feel this crushing weight, a fear that his gifts weren't enough, that he wasn't enough. He was making decent money between his 2 jobs, but Christmas spending was consuming money he didn't have. He was using credit cards because he believed that good fathers spend generously, and generosity meant debt. He was working himself into exhaustion, trying to buy his way into feeling like he was a good parent. The research backs this up. A study by the American Psychological Association found that parents who struggle financially experience significantly higher levels of guilt around major holidays. 92% of parents reported feeling anxiety about whether their Christmas spending would be perceived as enough by their children. Not enough money, enough love, enough care, enough proof that they matter. Parents are literally being taught to believe that financial proof equals parental proof. Layla knows this guilt intimately. She's 31, a kindergarten teacher, and she had her first child 2 years ago. When her daughter was born, she felt this surge of protective love that was almost violent in its intensity. And with that love came fear. Fear that she wouldn't do enough. Fear that she'd mess up. Fear that her daughter would somehow know that Layla was struggling financially, that they were living paycheck to paycheck, that Layla had $32,000 in student debt hanging over her head. When her daughter's first Christmas came around, Layla spiraled. She felt this pressure to make it magical, to make it expensive, to prove through spending that she was a devoted mother. She spent $900 on toys for a 2-year-old who would remember none of it. She went into debt for a baby to have a perfect first Christmas. This is what psychologists call compensatory consumption, the act of spending money to compensate for feelings of inadequacy. And it works in the short term. You buy the gifts, you see your child's face light up, you feel the rush of relief, the sense that you've done enough. But it's temporary. By January, the guilt returns. The debt remains. And the belief that you need to spend more to prove you're enough never actually goes away. James is 58, and he's been watching his retirement plans disappear for the last 5 years. His pension is smaller than he expected. His Social Security estimate is lower than he'd hoped. He needs to be working another 10 years, but he's exhausted. And Christmas? Christmas has become a financial catastrophe. His children and grandchildren expect him to be as generous as he was in his 50s when he was making good money, and his retirement felt secure. But his circumstances changed. His income changed. His ability to give didn't. And yet, he kept giving anyway, because he was terrified that his family would see him as less than if he admitted he couldn't afford it. He was terrified that admitting financial struggles would make him feel like a failure. The truth is, most people never question where their guilt comes from. They inherit it. They accept it. They pass it on to their own children. They teach their kids the same equation. Love equals spending. Generosity equals debt. Good people buy expensive Christmas gifts, even if they can't afford them. This is what I mean when I say the system is built into us. It's not just external pressure. It's internalized programming that feels like our own beliefs. But here's what's critical to understand. Just because you believe something doesn't mean it's true. And just because you were taught something doesn't mean you have to teach it forward. This year can be different. But first, you have to see where the guilt is coming from. You have to trace it back to its source. Was it your parents? Your culture? Advertising? Social expectations? The voices in your head telling you that you're not enough unless you prove it with money. Once you can identify where the guilt originates, you can start to separate it from who you actually are. You can start to question it. You can start to choose something different. The 4 people in this book, Sarah, Mark, Layla, and James, they all started with that question. They all traced their guilt back to its source. And then they did something radical. They decided to believe something different. And this year, so can you. Chapter 3. 4 people who said no. When you decide to say no to the Christmas spending trap, the first thing you discover is that you're not alone. Millions of people make this choice every year, but we don't talk about them. We talk about the people who go into debt. We talk about the people who regret their spending. We celebrate the people who work overtime to afford Christmas. But we almost never hear from the people who decided that this year would be different. Until now. Sarah made her choice in January. That's when the real damage was visible. She was looking at her credit card statement, the one showing $1,900 owed for Christmas spending that had stretched across 3 months of minimum payments. She was making decent money, but that money was going to interest charges on gifts that had already been forgotten. Her niece couldn't remember what Sarah had bought her. Her sister had thanked her once and moved on. The gifts were gone, but the debt remained. That's when Sarah decided, never again. This year, when October came around and the pressure started building, she had a plan. She set a budget of $400, not $1,600, $400. She told herself she would buy nothing she couldn't pay off by December 31st. She stopped going to stores. She stopped scrolling through online shopping sites. She created a list of people she cared about, and next to each name, she wrote how much she could spend and what she could actually afford to buy them. When the guilt came, and it did, she pulled out her credit card statement from last year. She looked at those numbers. She remembered the 3 months of payments, and the guilt lost its power. Mark's choice came differently. He was sitting with his 14-year-old son, and his son mentioned that he didn't really want expensive gifts anymore. His son said something that changed everything. "Dad, I just want you to not be tired all the time." That broke something open in Mark. He realized that he'd been working himself into exhaustion, using 2 jobs to justify Christmas spending, when what his family actually needed was his presence, his energy, his time. He was buying things he couldn't afford because he believed that's what good fathers do. But his actual children needed something completely different. This year, Mark sat down with both his kids and told them the truth. He said, "I love you both more than anything. And because I love you, I'm going to be honest about money. I usually spend over $1,200 on Christmas gifts for you both. But I'm tired all the time, and I'm working myself sick to afford it. This year, I'm spending $600. That's what feels right to me. Good gifts, but not debt. We can get some presents, or we can spend that money on an experience together. What matters more to you?" His 14-year-old immediately suggested they spend it on a weekend skiing trip. His 9-year-old wanted concert tickets. Mark looked at the numbers. The ski trip for 3 people was $180. 2 concert tickets were $120. That left $300 for some gifts and Christmas dinner. He could cover it all from 1 month of work without touching his second job income. For the first time in years, he wasn't going into debt. He wasn't extending payments into 2026. He wasn't drowning. He was just a father with his children, doing something together. Layla's realization came through her daughter. She'd been obsessing over making her 2-year-old's first Christmas perfect, which meant buying expensive gifts for a child who couldn't even appreciate them. One day, she was sitting with her daughter in the living room. They weren't doing anything special. Her daughter was just playing with some wooden blocks, making sounds, laughing at nothing. Layla realized something. Her daughter didn't need expensive toys. She needed her mother present. She needed her mother not stressed about money. She needed her mother available and calm and engaged. That's when the guilt shifted. This year, Layla is giving her daughter experiences, not things. She's spending money on a membership to a children's museum so they can go together every month. She's budgeting for a family trip to visit Layla's parents during spring break. She's spending maybe $200 total on Christmas, and her daughter will actually remember the experiences. More importantly, Layla won't spend 2025 paying for 2024's Christmas. She won't carry guilt and debt into the new year. James's choice came from necessity. He sat down with an accountant and looked at his actual financial picture. His retirement was real. His income was fixed. His ability to give couldn't change, no matter how much he wanted it to. The numbers didn't lie. He couldn't afford to be as generous as he'd been before. So he made a decision that terrified him. He called his adult children and told them the truth. He said, "I love you all. You know that. But I need to tell you something important. My financial situation has changed. I can't spend the way I used to spend. This year, I'm setting a budget of $500 for all Christmas gifts combined. If you're disappointed by that, I understand. But I'm telling you now because I'd rather have you disappointed in December than have me working past 70 because I spent money I didn't have trying to keep up an image." He was terrified. He waited for judgment. Instead, his oldest daughter said, "Dad, we didn't know you were stressed about this. We just wanted you to be okay. We'd rather have you around for decades than have expensive gifts." His children had been waiting for permission to let him off the hook. They were waiting for him to be honest about his limitations. Once he was, everything shifted. These 4 people, Sarah, Mark, Layla, and James, they all made the same fundamental choice. They all decided that honesty about money was more important than pretending everything was fine. They all chose to break the guilt-to-spending cycle, and none of them regretted it. When you say no to the system's demands, you discover something remarkable. The people who actually love you will understand. They'll respect you more for being honest than they ever did for going into debt to impress them. Your children will remember that you were present and calm more than they'll remember what was under the tree. Your family will adjust to a new reality if you give them permission to. And you'll discover that you were strong enough to make a different choice all along. The question is, who will you be this year? Will you be someone who bought Christmas on credit and paid for it all year? Or will you be someone who said no to the trap? Chapter 4. The Math Nobody Talks About. You already know you're spending $1,107 at Christmas. What you don't know is what that number actually costs you. Not in December, in the months that follow. People don't talk about this math because the system doesn't want you to see it clearly. But when you understand what's really happening to your money, everything changes. Let's do the calculation that credit card companies hope you never do. You spend $1,107 in December. You can't pay it off immediately because you have regular bills. Your mortgage or rent is due. Your utilities need to be paid. Your groceries have to be bought. So that $1,107 sits on your credit card, and interest starts accumulating. The average credit card APR in America is 21%. That means every month, 1.75% of your balance is being added as interest. By January, your $1,107 has become $1,126. By February, it's $1,146. By March, when you've been making minimum payments and the interest keeps compounding, you owe $1,181. You didn't spend $1,181. The system took an extra $74 from you through interest charges alone. But here's what's really happening beneath those numbers. That $74 isn't just an abstract fee. It's actual money coming out of your life. It's money that could have gone to your child's school supplies in January. It's money that could have covered the car repair you've been putting off. It's money that could have gone into your emergency fund so you don't have to use a credit card for actual emergencies. That $74 is the price of the system's profit. It's the price of your guilt. Now multiply that by the average American household. According to the Federal Reserve, 43% of households carry credit card debt. The average balance is $6,948. That's not all Christmas debt. But Christmas debt is the leading cause of new credit card debt in the United States. One study by the National Foundation for Credit Counseling found that 42% of people who carry credit card debt into January attribute it directly to holiday spending. That means roughly 25 million Americans are paying compound interest on Christmas right now. Not on necessities, not on emergency expenses, on gifts that have already been forgotten. Think about what that means. 25 million people are paying extra money every single month to maintain a system that profits from their guilt. 25 million people are working longer, earning less in real terms, because a portion of their monthly income is going to interest charges on purchases they made months ago. That's not a personal failure. That's a systematic extraction of wealth from people who love their families and were taught that love requires spending money they don't have. The math gets even darker when you look at what else could happen during those 3 months of minimum payments. Your car breaks down. That's $800 you can't afford. You put it on a credit card with 21% APR. Now you have Christmas debt and car debt, both accumulating interest. Your child needs unexpected medical care. Your heating bill is higher than expected because of a cold winter. Any small emergency becomes a larger one because your available credit is already being used to carry Christmas debt. This is how the average American household ends up owing $6,948 on credit cards. It's not that they're irresponsible. It's that they're caught in a system where one wave of debt crashes into the next wave, and suddenly they're drowning in compound interest. Here's the part that should make you angry. Credit card companies know this. They know the math. They know that 42% of the people who carry holiday debt won't pay it off by January. They count on it. Holiday spending is one of the most profitable times of year for the credit card industry because they know that guilt-driven purchases will turn into months of interest payments. They design their systems to encourage exactly this behavior. The easy checkout process, the rewards points, the offer to pay later. All of it is designed to keep you in this cycle. Let's do another calculation. If you spend $1,107 at Christmas and pay it off over 3 months at 21% APR, you'll make 3 minimum payments of roughly $370 each, paying about $74 in interest. If you do this for 10 years, and most people do in some form, you'll have paid $740 in pure interest charges for Christmas gifts. That's not for your mortgage. That's not for your child's education. That's not for your future. That's just interest on items you bought because you felt guilty. What if instead of carrying that debt, you built a Christmas fund? What if you saved $92 per month for 9 months before Christmas? You'd have just over $800, and you could pay for Christmas entirely in cash. No interest. No debt extending into 2026. Just money you actually have, spent on gifts you can afford. The psychological difference is enormous. You're not starting the new year in debt. You're starting it free. But here's what most people never consider. What if you spent less? Not $1,107, not $600. What if you spent $300? What if you directed that money you weren't spending toward your emergency fund instead? By the end of the year, you'd have $3,600 in savings. That's a real emergency fund. That's protection. That's freedom. The math nobody talks about is this. Every dollar you don't spend on Christmas guilt this year is a dollar that works for you next year instead of for the credit card company. Every dollar is a choice. And this year, you get to make a different choice. Chapter 5. Stop the guilt to spending cycle. The guilt comes first, then the spending, then the relief, then the debt, then the guilt again. This is the cycle that keeps billions of dollars flowing from your bank account to the system. It's not a cycle you're weak for being caught in. It's a cycle you were designed to be caught in. But cycles can be broken. And the moment you understand how this one works, you have the power to step out of it. The guilt to spending cycle operates in specific stages. And if you can identify which stage you're in right now, you can interrupt it before it happens again. Stage 1 is the trigger. Something activates the guilt. Your child mentions something a friend is getting. You see a commercial showing a perfect family Christmas. Someone tells you what they're spending on Christmas. You scroll through Instagram and see gift hauls. You compare yourself and feel like you're not enough. That trigger is what starts everything. When you feel that trigger, your brain immediately moves to stage 2. The internal story. You start telling yourself narratives. I'm not a good parent. I'm letting my family down. I should be doing more. I'm not generous enough. I don't care as much as I should. These stories feel true because they tap into fears that were already inside you. The system taught you these stories a long time ago, and now they live in your head, rent-free. Stage 3 is where the spending actually happens. The relief purchase. Your brain knows that spending money creates a temporary dopamine hit, so it pushes you toward the purchase. You buy the expensive gift. You justify it. You tell yourself it's temporary, that you'll figure out the money later. For about 5 minutes, the guilt quiets down. You did something. You took action. You showed you care. Your brain accepts this as solving the problem, and the reward chemicals flow. But stage 4 arrives inevitably. The debt reality. The credit card bill comes. You see the numbers. The guilt doesn't just return, it returns multiplied. Now you're not just guilty about whether you did enough for Christmas. You're guilty about the debt. You're guilty about not having self-control. You're guilty about having to worry about money. The guilt intensifies, and your brain, knowing that spending relieved it before, starts pushing toward another relief purchase. This is how you end up in compound debt. Breaking this cycle means interrupting it at the earliest possible stage. Not at stage 3 when you're already at the register. Not at stage 4 when the debt arrives. But at stage 1, when the trigger fires and you haven't yet moved to the internal story. Here's how to do it. When you feel the trigger, pause. Take 5 seconds. This is not time wasting. This is intervention. In those 5 seconds, something crucial happens. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, gets a chance to engage. The emotional trigger is still there, but you're not in pure emotional reaction anymore. You have a choice. Then do this. Identify the trigger out loud or write it down. Say or write, I'm feeling guilty because specific reason. Be specific. I'm feeling guilty because my nephew got an expensive video game and mine got something cheaper. Not, I'm feeling bad. Specific. Next, interrupt the internal story. The moment you name the trigger, your brain wants to jump to the story. I'm a bad parent. Stop it. Tell yourself a different story. Say out loud, this trigger was created by a system designed to make me feel guilty. My child loves me not because of how much I spent, but because I'm present. That's what I'll give this Christmas. That second story feels small and silly when you say it. But it's the antidote. It's the truth fighting back against the programming. This is what Sarah did. When she saw another family's Instagram post of elaborate gift giving, she paused. She identified the trigger. I'm feeling guilty because that family spent more than me. She interrupted her internal story. That family might be in debt. That family's expensive gifts don't make them better parents. My kids will remember that I was here and present more than they'll remember what was wrapped. The guilt didn't disappear instantly, but it lost its power to push her toward the store. Mark did this with his kids. When his 14-year-old mentioned a friend's expensive gift, Mark said, I see that triggered something in you. Let's talk about what you actually want. Do you want the expensive thing, or do you want us to be together and not stressed about money? His son chose the experience. The trigger was reframed as an opportunity for conversation instead of an opportunity for debt. The cycle breaks when you stop moving automatically from trigger to story, to spending to debt, to guilt to spending again. It breaks when you introduce consciousness into the process. It breaks when you pause for 5 seconds. Here's what you do today. The next time you feel guilty about Christmas spending or what you haven't bought yet, you're going to pause. You're going to identify the trigger. You're going to interrupt the story. And you're going to choose a different action. Not spending, not adding to debt. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's sitting with the discomfort for 5 minutes instead of buying it away. That choice, repeated, breaks the cycle. And that's how this year becomes different from every other year. Now, here's what actually works. You've seen the trap. You understand the math. You know how guilt turns into spending, spending turns into debt, and debt turns into months of financial stress. You might think you're already caught, that it's too late because it's November and Christmas is coming fast. It's not too late. Remember what we said at the beginning. This book is for happy Christmas, not against it. We believe in Christmas with gifts and lights and laughter. That's not changing. What changes is how you get there. Here's the truth right now. You have about 6 weeks. 6 weeks to make a different choice than you've made every other year. That's not a lot of time, but it's enough time to break the cycle if you're willing to be honest about what you can actually spend instead of what you think you should spend. Most people, when they hear they have 6 weeks, panic. They think about all the shopping they haven't done and all the money they don't have. But what if you flipped that? What if instead of spending money you don't have, you figured out exactly how much money you do have, and then made that work? That's what the people in this book did. Sarah looked at her budget for November and December and decided she could spend $400 without going into debt. So she did. Mark realized he could find $600 from his paycheck without using credit. Layla made a hard decision that she would spend only what was in her savings, not what she could borrow. James had a conversation with his family about what he could actually afford. None of them had months to plan. None of them had time to save gradually. They just made a choice with what they had right now. And it worked. The second way to celebrate Christmas, the way that actually works, is to stop spending on guilt and start spending on what's in front of you. You walk into the next 6 weeks knowing exactly what you have. You spend it thoughtfully. You celebrate with your family. Your kids wake up on Christmas morning and you get to be present instead of stressed. Then January comes without a debt hangover. You start the year unencumbered. That's the difference between the trap and freedom. Not months of preparation. Just honesty right now about what you can actually afford and the willingness to stick to it. The question for you isn't whether you should buy Christmas gifts. It's what you're actually going to spend in the time you have left, and whether you're going to do it with money you have or money you'll be paying for in March. That's what the rest of this book is about. Concrete strategies for these next 6 weeks. How to spend what you actually have. How to make Christmas happen without destroying your financial life. This year, you can have something that's possible starting today. A celebration that doesn't require debt. Chapter 6. Know your number. There's a moment that changes everything. It's not dramatic. It doesn't happen at a store or in front of your family. It happens alone, usually at night, when you're honest with yourself about money for the first time in years. The moment when you stop guessing and start knowing. That moment is when you figure out your number. Your number is the amount of money you can actually spend on Christmas without borrowing, without credit, without guilt. Not what you think you should spend. Not what you see other people spending. Not what would make Christmas look perfect on Instagram. Your number is the truth about what you have available right now. Most people never figure out their number. They exist in a constant state of fuzzy approximation. They know Christmas is coming. They have a vague sense of whether they can afford things or not. But they've never sat down and actually done the math. So when December arrives and the pressure hits, they make decisions based on emotion instead of reality. The guilt speaks louder than the numbers. The comparison with what other people are buying whispers in their ear. And suddenly they're spending money they don't have because they never established what they actually have. Sarah's number was $400. When she first calculated it, she was shocked. She had convinced herself it would be higher, but when she looked at her bank account honestly, when she removed the wishful thinking and the shame, $400 was the real number. Once she knew it, everything changed. She didn't have to wonder whether she could afford something. She didn't have to guess. She just looked at the price tag and compared it to her number. If it fit, she bought it. If it didn't, she didn't. The decision became mechanical, which meant the guilt disappeared. She wasn't failing. She was being honest. Mark's number was $600. Wasn't enough to buy what he'd been buying before. Wasn't enough to replicate the Christmas his kids expected. But it was honest. And once he knew his number, he could make a plan. He could say to his kids, "This is what I can spend. How do we make Christmas great with this amount?" That conversation wouldn't have been possible before he knew his number. Before, he was drowning in uncertainty. After, he was operating from clarity. The way to find your number is simple, but it requires honesty. You're going to look at your financial situation right now. Not what you wish it was, what it actually is. You're going to look at your income for the coming weeks and months leading up to Christmas. You're going to look at your regular expenses, rent or mortgage, utilities, food, transportation, insurance, all of it. You're going to see how much is left after those things are paid. That's the pool of money you can potentially spend on Christmas. But there's another step. You're going to keep a buffer. You're going to leave money for emergencies, because emergencies don't take vacations in December. If your water heater breaks in January or your car needs a repair in February, you don't want that to be the moment you realize you overcommitted financially to Christmas. So you're going to take the available money and you're going to reserve some percentage of it. Maybe 20%, maybe 30%, depending on what feels safe to you. For life to happen, what's left is your number. It's not the number you want. It might be smaller than the number you expected. It might be uncomfortably small. But it's the number you have. And it's the only number that matters because it's the only number that won't destroy you in March. Here's what's remarkable about knowing your number. The guilt doesn't disappear immediately, but it stops having leverage. When you're operating from a real number, your brain can do math instead of having to listen to emotion. Guilt says, you should spend more. Your kids deserve better gifts. Everyone else is spending more. But your number says, I have $400. I can buy meaningful gifts with $400. I am not failing my family by staying within my means. One number beats 1,000 guilty thoughts every single time. The 4 people we talked about all had a moment where they stopped making guesses and started knowing their number. Sarah calculated hers on a Tuesday evening while looking at her bank account. Mark calculated his by looking at his paychecks and backing out his regular expenses. Layla did hers by admitting that she could spend her savings, but that she wouldn't spend money she didn't have. James calculated his by looking at his fixed income and being honest about what was left after everything else. They all arrived at different numbers, but they all arrived at something real. The guilt you feel right now isn't actually about not spending enough. It's about not knowing enough. It's about making decisions in the dark and being uncertain. Once you know your number, the uncertainty ends. You're not guessing anymore. You're not hoping that somehow it will all work out. You're operating from reality, and reality, no matter how uncomfortable, is always better than the anxiety of not knowing. Your first action, before you do anything else, is this. Find out what your number is. Sit down for 30 minutes. Look at what you actually have available. Do the math. Write it down. That single piece of information will change how you approach the entire season. Because here's what happens next. Once you know your number, you can start having fun. Chapter 7. The Gift Trap. What actually matters. You know your number now. You know exactly what you can spend. But knowing your budget doesn't automatically answer the question that has kept you awake at night for years. Is it enough? Will your gifts be good enough? Will your family understand why you're not spending as much as you used to? Will they feel disappointed? The answer is probably yes. And that's the point where most people break. This is where the gift trap lives. It's not the question of whether you can afford something. It's the question of whether what you can afford will be good enough. And the retail industry has spent decades teaching you that it won't. They've created an entire mythology around gift giving that goes like this. The price of a gift correlates directly to how much you love someone. A cheap gift means you don't care much. An expensive gift means you love them deeply. An extraordinary gift means you love them extraordinarily. This mythology is completely false. And yet most of us have internalized it so completely that we operate from it without even realizing. Here's what psychology tells us about gifts. People remember experiences more vividly and more durably than they remember objects. They remember the feeling of receiving something thoughtful and unexpected more than they remember the price tag. They remember being together with people they love far more than they remember what was wrapped in paper. The research is overwhelming on this point, and yet, on Christmas morning, people are still measuring love by the size of the pile of presents. The trap isn't that expensive gifts are bad. The trap is that you believe they're necessary to show love. That you believe the only way your family will feel cared for is if you bankrupt yourself for them. That you believe a $200 toy will create more joy than a $50 toy, plus your undivided attention and presence during the holiday. Layla figured this out when she stopped buying things for her daughter and started buying experiences. She realized her 2-year-old wouldn't remember the toy, but she would remember her mother being present and calm and available. That reframing didn't mean Layla didn't buy gifts at all. She still bought them. But she bought different gifts, smaller gifts, simpler gifts, gifts that cost less money but required more thought. This is the essential shift, from spending more to thinking more. When you have limited money to spend on gifts, you have to get creative. You have to think about what would actually make someone happy, rather than what marketing tells you should make them happy. You have to pay attention. You have to notice that your sister has been mentioning needing a better coffee mug, or that your niece is obsessed with a particular book series. You have to think about what would actually delight someone, not what would impress them. There's a psychological effect called the effort premium. People value gifts more highly when they perceive that effort went into selecting them. A carefully chosen $30 gift that shows you paid attention and know what someone actually wants creates more joy and gratitude than a $200 designer item that you grabbed because the brand sounded expensive. The recipient can feel whether you were thinking about them specifically or just throwing money at the problem. Your limited budget is actually an advantage disguised as a constraint. It forces you to be intentional. It forces you to think. It forces you to pay attention to the people you're buying for in a way that unlimited spending does not. Here's what this looks like in practice. Make a list of everyone you're buying gifts for. Next to each name, write down something you actually know about them. Something specific. Not, he likes sports. Something real. He's been complaining that he only has one pair of good work socks. Or, she's been talking about wanting to get back into reading but hasn't had time. Or, he mentioned that his laptop bag is falling apart and he needs a new one. Once you've done that, your shopping becomes a puzzle to solve instead of a source of anxiety. You're not wandering around stores trying to figure out what's expensive enough to prove your love. You're looking for a solution to a specific problem or a specific desire you know someone has. And the beauty of this approach is that solutions often cost less than status symbols. The work socks might be $20. The book might be $15. A quality used laptop bag might be $25. And all of those gifts will create more genuine joy than a random expensive item could ever create. The gift trap keeps people trapped because it conflates spending with caring. The way out of the trap is to separate them. To understand that a thoughtful gift says, I see you, I know you, I care about what matters to you. And those gifts almost always cost less than the alternatives. Your number isn't a limit on love. It's a boundary on guilt. And once you understand that boundary, you can use your money differently. You can spend it on gifts people actually want instead of gifts that are supposed to signal how much you care. You can buy gifts that people will appreciate for their thoughtfulness instead of their price tag. You can spend less and feel better about what you've chosen. That's when Christmas becomes something you enjoy instead of something that stresses you. Chapter 8. Honesty changes everything. There's a conversation you're probably avoiding. It's the one where you tell your family that this Christmas is going to look different, that you're not spending what you spent last year, that you're not buying as much, that you're doing something different, and you need them to understand why. Most people avoid this conversation because they're afraid. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid that admitting you can't spend as much as you spent before somehow makes you less capable, less generous, less worthy. So instead of having the conversation, they go into debt. They charge things to credit cards. They make promises to themselves to figure it out later, and then spend the next 3 months in financial stress. The conversation is actually the solution. James discovered this when he decided to call his adult children and tell them his financial situation had changed. He expected judgment. He expected pressure to overspend anyway. Instead, his oldest daughter said something that changed everything. "Dad, we didn't know you were stressed about this. We just wanted you to be okay. We'd rather have you around for decades than have expensive gifts." His children had been waiting for permission to let him off the hook. They were waiting for him to be honest about his limitations. Once he was, the entire dynamic shifted. Here's what honesty does. It removes the pretense. It stops the game. It says, "This is the reality, and I'm inviting you to be part of solving it with me instead of pretending everything is fine when it isn't." People, especially the people who love you, respond to honesty. They don't respond well to pretense or to discovering later that you went into debt to impress them. But when you tell them in advance that your circumstances have changed, when you explain what you can actually spend, when you ask them to be part of the solution instead of expecting them to be blind to the problem, something shifts. Mark told his kids, "I love you both. Here's what I can spend this year. How do we make Christmas great with this amount?" That question turned his children from passive recipients of gifts into active participants in creating their Christmas. His 14-year-old suggested the skiing trip. His 9-year-old wanted concert tickets. They became invested in making the Christmas work because they understood the constraints and got to help solve the puzzle. Sarah told her sister, "Christmas spending has been stressing me out. I'm going to do things differently this year, and I wanted you to hear it from me instead of noticing it when you see fewer gifts under the tree." Her sister's response, "Honestly, I've been stressed about it too. I'm so glad you said something." Honesty opens doors. It creates permission for other people to be honest too. It transforms Christmas from a performance where everyone pretends everything is fine into a real experience, where real people gather with real limitations and real love. The fear you have about being honest is usually worse than the actual response. People understand financial constraints. People respect honesty, and they are often relieved when someone else names the elephant in the room that they've been sensing but not discussing. The conversation doesn't have to be long or complicated. You could say, "I want to talk to you about Christmas this year. My situation is different than last year, and I'm spending less on gifts. I wanted you to know that in advance, so it's not a surprise. I'm still excited about the holidays, and I still love you. This is just a different approach." That's it. That's the entire conversation. And what happens next is almost always better than what you feared. When you remove the pretense, you remove the shame. When you remove the shame, you remove a lot of the guilt, and then you start to experience Christmas as something you actually enjoy instead of something you survive. You get to be present with your family instead of stressed about money. You get to be honest instead of performing. This is what breaks the cycle permanently. Not just this year, but next year too. Because once you've had the conversation once, it gets easier to have it again. Once your family has seen that Christmas with less spending doesn't mean Christmas with less love, the pressure decreases. The mythology starts to crack. Real connection starts to matter more than status signaling. Your family wants you to be okay. They want you to be present. They want you to be honest with them. They're waiting for permission to let you off the hook. The conversation you're avoiding is the conversation that will set you free. Have it before you start shopping. Have it this week. Have it today. Don't wait for Christmas morning to have anyone discover that things are different. Tell them now. Invite them into the reality instead of surprising them with it later. That single conversation will change the entire experience of the season. Because here's the thing about honesty. It's contagious. Once you're honest, other people give themselves permission to be honest too. And suddenly you're not pretending anymore. You're just being real together. And Christmas with real people is infinitely better than Christmas with a performance. Chapter 9. Your action plan starts today. You now understand the trap. You know how guilt becomes spending, becomes debt, becomes shame. You know about your number. You know how to choose meaningful gifts. You know that honesty with your family opens doors instead of closing them. You have all the information. You have the framework. You have the permission. Now comes the part that matters most. Actually doing it. Most people who read or listen to something like this will put it down and go back to their regular patterns. They'll think, this was interesting, and then they'll spend the same way they've always spent, because changing patterns is hard. The inertia is strong. The guilt still whispers. The system still pushes. And so they drift back to what's familiar, even though they know it doesn't work. You don't have to be most people. Right now, today, you're going to do 3 things. Not eventually, not tomorrow. Today. These are small actions, but they break the pattern. They shift you from thinking about change to actually creating it. Action 1. Calculate your number. Find 30 minutes in your calendar. Just 30 minutes. Put your phone away so nobody interrupts you. Open your banking app or your bank statements. Look at your actual income for the coming period. Look at your actual expenses. Everything you have to pay for before you can spend on Christmas. Do the math. What's left? Subtract a small buffer for emergencies, maybe 20%, and see what you actually have available for Christmas spending. Write it down. That number is your anchor. That number is what's real. That number is what sets you free from guessing. Don't revise the number upward because it feels too small. Don't convince yourself that you'll find money somewhere else later. This is the real number. Write it down and accept it. Action 2. Make your gift list, open a document, or grab a piece of paper. Write down everyone you're buying gifts for. Not everyone you might give something to eventually. Everyone you're actually buying gifts for this season. Next to each name, write down 3 things. What their actual interests are, what they've mentioned needing recently, and what price range works for your number. If you have $400 to spend and 6 people to buy for, that's roughly $65 per person. But some people on your list might need less than that, which leaves more for others. That's the puzzle you're solving. Don't start shopping yet. Just make the list. Just notice what becomes clear when you write it down. Action 3. Have the conversation. Pick one person you need to be honest with. It might be your partner. It might be your parent. It might be your kids. It might be a sibling you usually exchange gifts with. But pick one person and tell them that this year is different. Tell them your number. Tell them why you're making this choice. Tell them that you still care deeply about Christmas, but you're doing it differently this year. Make it brief and matter of fact. Don't expect an elaborate response. Just tell them. If you have a partner or family you live with, this conversation needs to happen before you start shopping so they're not surprised in December. If you have extended family you exchange gifts with, this conversation can happen this week. But have it. Don't skip this step. The honesty is what unlocks everything. After you've done these 3 actions today, you can close this book. You can stop listening. Because here's the thing. You don't need more information. You don't need more motivation. You need to do something. And now you have 3 small things you can do today that will shift your entire approach to this season. The guilt you've been carrying isn't actually about loving your family less. It's not about being a worse person than the year before. The guilt is about pretending. It's about spending money you don't have to perform a version of Christmas that isn't real. It's about not being honest about what you actually have and what you actually want. When you stop pretending, the guilt ends. When you're honest about your number, your gift choices become clear. When you tell your family the truth, they get to be part of the solution instead of confused by the surprise. When you act, today, this week, this season, you break the pattern. Next Christmas, when the guilt starts to whisper in September, you won't have to listen to it the way you did before. Because you'll know something you didn't know before. You can have a happy Christmas without destroying yourself financially. You've proven it. You've lived it. You know it's possible. But that only happens if you start today. Not because you read something compelling, but because you actually took action. You found your number. You made your list. You had the conversation. You did the work. That's when everything changes. Your Christmas this year is going to be different because you're being honest. You're being intentional. You're being present. You're breaking a pattern that's been running your life for years. And your family will feel that. They'll feel the difference in you, in your peace, in your presence, in your freedom from guilt. That's the gift that matters most. That's the gift that lasts. It all starts today, with one conversation, one list, one number. Do it now.